Richard Wagner, the stage director, was surpassed only by Richard Wagner, the composer. Here are his instructions, literally translated for the climax of Götterdämmerung, that cataclysmic summing up of the Ring of the Nibelungen. Brünnhilde perceives her horse. She springs toward him, seizes and unbridles him, then bends affectionately toward him. 34 bars later, she swings herself on the horse and urges it to spring forward. And with the last measures she sings, she makes her horse leap into the burning pile of logs. So far as we know, Marjorie Lawrence is the only soprano ever to carry out the master's orders. In her first season at the Metropolitan, and against the advice and wishes of everybody, she rode Grani into the flames. It must have been pretty important in her life. She devotes the entire first chapter of her autobiography to it. It certainly is important in the annals of the Metropolitan. Marjorie Lawrence not only suited the action to the word, she had the voice to suit both. And in a moment you're going to hear it on her incredible recording of the final pages of Brünnhilde's Immolation. Marjorie Lawrence came honestly by her handling of horse flesh. She was born of good, solid farmer stock at Dean's Marsh, Victoria, Australia. She was a tomboy. I milked cows. Milking cows, by the way, she says in her book, is not so arduous a job as city people imagine. Drove sheep from paddock to paddock, fed pigs, and generally pulled her weight in helping to run the place. No wonder Brünnhilde's steed knew who was in charge. She'd been told that if a girl ran away from home before she was 18, her family could haul her back by law. Immediately after her 18th birthday, she took off for Melbourne to study singing. She'd taken sewing lessons to support herself. And one day she tarried too long over O Don Fatale in the studio and was fired from her job at the factory. Even so, she entered 14 separate events in the big musical competition at Geelong, where John Brownlee comes from. She came out a winner, and with enough money to take her to Paris for further study. It was then a matter of time before she won a contract from the Paris Opera. One of her roles there was Salome, which of course she sang in French, the language in which Wilde wrote it, overripe, decadent. She later repeated the part at the Metropolitan. Wagner was always with her, and she with Wagner. Her debut in Paris was as Ortrud in Lohengrin, the season after Flagstaff came. That meant Marjorie Lawrence not only had to hold her own with the great Norwegian, but in a company which had at the same time Retberg and Lehmann and later Traubel. She did. Now listen to the last scene of Die Walküre, where Brünnhilde pleads with Wotan. War es so schmählich, was ich verbrach? Was it so shameful what I did, she asks. After all, she was only carrying out her father's original command when she protected Siegmund in his battle with Hunding. The versatility of this woman was remarkable. Like Nielsen today, she sang Tosca as well as all three Brünnhildes. She also sang Thais and Carmen in La Juive. As we told you, she made her debut in a mezzo role. And she often sang Amneris, as she did only recently in a production of Aida with her students at Carbondale, Illinois, where she's professor of voice and director of the opera workshop at Southern Illinois University. Let's hear her now in a mezzo role. At the peak of her career, Marjorie Lawrence was struck down with poliomyelitis, infantile paralysis. It was swift and cruel and terrible. During a rehearsal in Mexico City, her description of the pain, the despair, would be unendurable if it weren't quickly followed by the accounts of her gallant and extraordinary comeback. Have you ever tried remaking your world? Have you ever fought the doubts and fears that St. John of the Cross called the dark night of the soul? From her wheelchair, Marjorie Lawrence was the same vital, beautiful creature she'd been when she clicked Carmen's castanets and flashed Brunhilde's spear, and then would go dancing all night at the plaza. Venus in Tannhäuser, she could negotiate from the goddess's voluptuous couch. Isolde she managed by having Brangäna hand her the torch, and with Tristan entering from her front wing so that she could see him approach as she waved her scarf. In the last act, Courvenal carried her on stage and placed her on the couch beside the dying Tristan. By her side, in this superhuman fight, was the man she calls Angel. There's an entire chapter in her autobiography entitled My Angel, Tom King, the young Southern doctor whom she met in 1941. There'd been romances with a handsome young Frenchman in Paris, a glamorous Russian prince in the best prima donna tradition in New York. But Dr. Thomas King was it, and her book, called Interrupted Melody, is dedicated to him, without whose devotion and loving care the melody might have remained interrupted. She sang not only at the Metropolitan, where Sir Thomas Beecham proclaimed her the world's greatest Isolde, but for our fighting men in camps and hospitals, England, Holland, the South Pacific, everywhere. Always on the program was a song of her native Australia, Waltzing Matilda. Now this is a song of the bush, the great outdoors, and it's in a language all its own. It even contains some Aboriginal words. The itinerant laborer carried everything he owned in a kind of blanket on his back called a swag. As he strode to the next ranch, he developed a kind of gait that looked like a dance and gave him the name Waltzing Matilda.
Once a jolly swagman camped by a billabong under the shade of a coolibah tree, and he sang as he watched and waited till his billy boiled. You'll come a waltzing Matilda with me. Waltzing Matilda, waltzing Matilda, you'll come a waltzing Matilda with me. And he sang as he watched and waited till his billy boiled. You'll come a waltzing Matilda with me. Down came the jumbuck to drink at the billabong. Up jumped the swagman and grabbed him with glee. And he sang as he shoved that jumbuck in his packer bag. You'll come a waltzing Matilda with me. Waltzing Matilda, waltzing Matilda, you'll come a waltzing Matilda with me. And he sang as he shoved that jumbuck in his packer bag. You'll come a waltzing Matilda with me. Waltzing Matilda, waltzing Matilda, you'll come a waltzing Matilda with me. And he sang as he shoved that jumbuck in his packer bag. You'll come a waltzing Matilda with me.
And how about this Scottish song, Down the Burn?
When trees did bud and fields were green, and broom blossoms fell from me, when Mary was complete king, and love
For those of you not up on your Scottish dialect, burn means a little river or creek, we would say in this country. So down the burn is down the river. It never comes that some of us don't remember the message of King George VI, December 25th, 1939. We were not yet in the war, and England had been in less than 4 months. Marjorie Lawrence was at the height of her career, but dark days were ahead for her, for us, our countries, the Commonwealth. Looking back, the King's speech that Christmas Day had the faith, the courage with which Marjorie Lawrence was later to light the world. And I said to the man who stood at the gate of the year, "Give me a light that I may tread safely into the unknown." And he replied, "Go out into the darkness and put your hand into the hand of God. That shall be to you better than a light and safer than a known way."